Welcome to Middle School Mathematics online course. My name is Jessica Garza, and I will be presenting this lesson. This lesson is designed for 8th grade mathematics. This is a continuation of Unit 12, Probability. In this lesson, we will learn how to compute the outcomes from an experiment. These are the objectives for Lesson 3. We will cover each objective individually. In the first objective, you will learn to interpret vocabulary from the lesson in at least one sentence, which means you will need to interpret in your words one of the vocabulary words. It must be structured in sentence form. In the second objective, you will prepare an experiment using physical concrete objects with at least 2 items, which means it has to be a physical object like dice, cards, a spinner, and you must be able to have at least 2 choices within the experiment. In the third objective, you will identify the sample data from an experiment with at least 2 results. And we'll get more into it as we go through the lesson. The fourth objective, you will be able to express the outcomes from the experiment using at least one character or number or some type of alphanumeric value. We will cover this more in detail as we go through the lesson. The fifth objective, you will compute the total amount of results from the outcomes with one number or a single numerical value. Objective 6. You will compose an experiment to demonstrate an outcome with at least 3 results. This is where you will design your own experiment. But make sure that you're able to get 3 outcomes or 3 results from your experiment. These are the vocabulary from our previous lessons: sample data, tree diagram, counting principle. In this lesson, we're going to add experiment to the vocabulary. For this lesson, experiment is a situation that carries out specific actions and observe particular chances. We will go through a few examples to clarify experiment. Another vocabulary for this lesson is outcome. Outcome are results that are likely to occur or results that are likely possible. Now, they almost mean the same thing, but you can use either definition. Let's try the first experiment. Our first experiment is to toss a 2-sided picture disc. So an experiment is something that you want to do to get some results out of it. So what I want to do is toss a 2-sided picture disc and then see what happens once it is tossed. On my picture disc, one side will show apples. The other side of the disc will show grapes. Now that I have the experiment, what I want to do now is determine the sample data for the experiment. But I do want to set up or prepare the data and for this experiment, the sample data is simply apples, grapes, which I listed in alphabetical order. Now I need to do the outcomes. The outcome is what is likely to occur or what is likely possible. If I toss the picture disc, what can occur is apples or grapes. If you noticed, I placed them in braces in list form. What we want to do next is to express the outcomes using a single letter or a single character. What I can do is, for apples, I can use A. For grapes, I can use the letter G. So my outcomes will be A, G. The next thing we want to do is to compute the total amount of results. So if I go back to the outcomes, they were A and G. And I only had two choices, or two occurrences, or two things that were likely possible. So the total amount from the outcomes is 2. Let's try another experiment. Let's roll 2 6-sided dice. Now each die has a side with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 dots. So I want to determine the sample data for the experiment. Now for this sample data, let's use a table. So I'll set up my table. For die 1, I can toss a 1 first, then if I toss die 2, I can get a 1. Or I can get a 1 first, and then a 2. And I keep doing this until I get all of it completed. So eventually I'm going to get a 6 on the first die, a 5 on the second die, or I can get a 6 on the first die and a 6 on the second die. So that my table shows all my sample data. So now I can find my outcomes. And this is how I form it or set it up in a mathematical form. Look at the first pair of parentheses, 1, 1. That means on my first die I can get a 1, my second die I can also get a 1, and so forth. And look at the pair, 5, 4. That means I get a 5 on the first die, a 4 on the second die. And that's different than 4, 5, because that means I can get 4 on the first die and 5 on the second die. What I want to do now is compute the total amount of results. So I take a look at my outcomes again. I can count each pair. So once I count all the pairs, the total amount for the outcomes is 36. And I got that by counting each individual pair. But let's try something different. Let's compute the total amount of results, but this time, let's use the counting principle, since we have more than one object. Recall that the first die has 6 sides with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the second die also has 6 sides with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the first die has 6 choices, the second die has 6 choices. So if I apply the counting principle, I can do 6 times 6 and get 36. And that was the total amount from the outcomes, 36. So using the counting principle, it did make things a little bit easier and also faster. Let's try another experiment. On this one, I want to toss a die and spin a colored spinner. So I need to determine the sample data for this experiment. For this sample data, I'm also going to use a table. And if I toss the die, I can get a 1 first. If I spin the spinner, I can get a red. Or I can get a 1 again, and then green, then a 1, then blue. And I keep that up until I get all the possible choices that can occur, or that are likely possible. So remember, I want to express them using just one character. So on the first one, which is the die, I can get a 1. The spinner, I can get R, which means red. I can get a 1 and G, where G means green. And then you complete the table. So my outcomes were 1, R, 1, G, 1, B, and so forth, which is a lot easier to write than having to use the words red, green, or blue. So now we need to compute the total amount of results. Let's recall that the die has 6 sides and the spinner has 3 colors. So let's use the counting principle. There were 6 sides and 3 colors, so I do 6 times 3 and get 18. So the total amount from the outcome is 18. Thank you for your cooperation. Remember, try your best on the next activity. This ends the presentation.